Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is the CRO Perspective, growing FreightTech sales with my friend Ryan Sullivan. How's it going, Ryan?
Going great, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Ryan. So, Ryan, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
So my name is Ryan Sullivan. I'm the founder of Ratchet Ventures, which is a fractional head of sales and CRO company. And I live in beautiful Boston, Massachusetts.
Very nice. So CRO stands for what?
Stands for Chief Revenue Officer. So the fractional element of it is I essentially work with multiple early stage companies, from visibility to 3PL warehousing to third-party logistics and transportation management system in limited fractional capacities, and help them to build out their go-to-market and increase sales.
Very nice. Very nice. I got to tell you, since I've been around for a while, I've noticed kind of changes to titles. So I think we've gone to a place where now we have Chief Revenue Officer. So that's a job. You've had that job. And then we have a Chief Marketing Officer. We didn't have those. I didn't even say 15 years ago. You didn't see those titles out there. Now we see them all the time. And of course, companies like yours taking advantage of that, saying, hey, maybe you want a fractional CRO. So please speak to, first off, I think it's the growing importance of revenue. We've always seen it, but we never elevated the revenue guys, the marketing guys, to the same level as operations or finance. Now we are.
Yeah. I think that we've seen the growth of this as the rules have changed a bit. 5 or 8 years ago, for private companies, bookings or CAR, contracted ARR, was the measurement of success of an organization. As we turn more toward profitability and recognized revenue, the skill set for just hunting deals changes, and you need a finance/sales background to truly maximize revenue, leading to more interest in the role.
Yep. By the way, I spent much of my career in automotive and engineering and manufacturing and managing projects, IT, whatever it might have been. And in those companies, big companies like Ford, General Motors, Nissan, all these companies that I had worked with, nobody talked about sales. The dealerships did the sales. And so sales was important internally so that you could sell, but that is not the central focus of those organizations. And because they have the dealer network and marketing very separate. And then when I left the big automotive world, then you get into logistics, the only thing that matters is sell. And I've heard people say it, and I'm a small business owner as you are. We now all think, hey, if you can get enough sales, you can fix the other problems. I can buy the solutions to all my other problems. And I know we have a lot of private equity money, a lot of VC money, a lot of just very successful companies that say, we have to sell like crazy. And right now we're in a little bit of a rough market. Everybody needs sales help.
Yeah, that's totally true. And there certainly are companies that are growing and despite the market. And I think that's part of what I'm trying to offer, whether it be the channels that you mentioned or the market segments, is there's a better way that we can control our own destiny and mitigate some of the dependencies we have on the market or on channels to produce.
So Ryan, who are your ideal customers?
So my ideal customers are companies that are typically plus or minus 12 months from a Series A. So I work with angel funded and seed companies that might have 5 to 10 people. And then I work with larger, more established companies that might be 100 or 150 people. And the big sort of niche that I've carved out is people looking to transition off of founder-led sales. So taking what's great about the founder and then wrapping process around it that allows us to hire more junior people and allow the founder or the CEO to take care of other portions of the business in a period of scaling.
Very nice. Very nice. And what problem are you solving for those customers?
So the primary problem is scaling up. So if you think about the average company, around a Series A. The founder is the best salesperson in the company, typically, and they sell based off subject matter expertise, their title, their enthusiasm, which you don't get with every person that you hire, unfortunately. So there's only three ways to grow sales revenue. It's either you sell larger deals, you convert a higher percentage of the opportunities that you have, or you convert at the same percentage and you add more opportunities. So I help to drive those buckets and allow founders to going back to the massive responsibility they have for other areas of the business.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And by the way, there's lots of companies in this boat where the owner, the founder, I'll say, the founder of the company, he saw the original hole in the market, said, I think we can do better. He filled that. He's got a great story. I talk to a lot of those people on my podcast. They have a story that is all about the founding of that company. And so when they're talking to customers, then they usually have a lot of charisma. They have a lot of passion because it's their solution. And the problem is you can only grow so big if the founder is your sales guy and the only sales guy. And if everybody says, oh, I only want to work with Ryan because he's the founder, you have to get to a place where the founder can focus on other things. And in many cases, especially smaller companies, the founder is in charge of finance, the only one who really cares about the finances. He's the only one who cares about having efficiency in the operations, and he's the best sales guy. And those companies are limited in their growth until you get a team around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And truthfully, this is not a knock against founders or CEOs, but they have the hardest jobs of anybody on the planet. So they need to be an expert in basically every area of the business. And as your company grows, your job changes. So like you go from just worrying about sales as that's the most important thing to now you want to grow sales. So you add some salespeople, but no one else has the CEO title. No one else has control of the roadmap and what they're willing to do or build. And so I think as we start to wrap process around that, we're never going to replicate the founder, but we can leverage what's great about them and wrap it with sales best practices that allow it to be executed and ultimately measured by others.
Yeah. And by the way, I know just because I've worked with a lot of smaller companies, sometimes the founder-led sales becomes a problem because the founder is wearing a lot of different hats and he isn't able to be 45 hours a week, 50 hours a week selling. And that's what you really want. And because he's got other responsibilities, or she has a lot of other responsibilities. So founder-led sales is necessary in the beginning, but becomes a little bit of a crutch at some point. Anyway, Ryan, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you started Ratchet Ventures.
Yes. So we're going to go way back. So I I grew up in New York, Hudson Valley region. So Poughkeepsie, Newburgh area, 90 minutes north of Manhattan and 90 minutes south of Albany. I grew up, you can see the stuff in the background, as a Boston fan in New York. My dad was from Boston and I bounced around. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I went to college because that's what people are told they're supposed to do. And didn't do great, had some trouble. So I went to 4 different colleges, but spent the most time at College of St. Rose in Albany. And after I hadn't completed college, I got a job selling cell phones. And I was like, oh, I'll try sales. And it was mall kiosks. And there was 5 of them. And in the training, they're like, oh, you can go out and sell to businesses. And I was like, why doesn't anybody do this? And they were like, well, it's a 100% commission job and people always come to the booth. So you can count on $100 a day. So I was like, whatever, I don't care. I'm going to give it a shot. So it was the only month they'd ever run a contest. And I sold the largest deal in New York State history for an authorized retailer, Verizon, in this only month they ever ran a contest. Yeah, it was pretty epic. And so then I'm about to go on this cruise and I get a +1. And all my friends were in a similar spot to what I had been in. They didn't have the means basically to go. So I invited my friend that I worked with. And on the second day of the cruise, I met my now wife on a bar crawl. We have 2 children, 1.5 and 3. And my friend Mark that I brought met his wife, and he has two children. So it was just an amazing experience. And from there, I really started to figure it out and get my life together. So I moved to Boston. I went back to school. I worked full time in a restaurant. I went from a 2.0 to a 4.0. Tells you something. If your parents help you too much in college, you probably don't. Once they cut you off, it's a different game. I finished school and I fell into a role at Constant Contact. So I come at supply chain tech sales different than most people. Most people start on the transportation side and move into tech. So I worked at Constant Contact. I got addicted to the idea of winning, super competitive leaderboards, people shooting dart guns, riding around with scooters when they're on the phone. And I got promoted there, and I led a test team cross-selling products for this company, Endurance, that ultimately acquired Constant Contact for 1.1 billion. And then from there, I accidentally started my own tech startup. So inspired by FanDuel and DraftKings, I was beating my friend in NBA 2K playing Xbox. And I'm like, how can they say that DraftKings is a skill thing when I'm basically playing fantasy football and me beating you over and over is not? So he had been an entrepreneur, and we started a company that allowed people to gamble. We couldn't call it gambling at that point. At that point, it was skilled gaming. And we went out and got a legal opinion in 13 states that this was legal. And we built an SDK that connected into developers' games and allowed them to monetize them through real cash tournaments.
Wait, what's SDK?
SDK is the API. It's basically just like a plugin that if you like to play the helicopter game where you got to go up and down and avoid obstacles, you could turn that into a best score of the day. Everyone puts in $1. Best score of the day gets whatever the prize pool is. So there I learned about fundraising. I learned about building products. I have tremendous appreciation for engineering because as a non-technical person, I was managing offshore developers coding products. So it didn't end great, truthfully, but I'd manufactured so much experience, no one would have been stupid enough to give me at 24. And it does still haunt me a little bit because when I ended it in 2017, the fastest growing private company in the country was my only competitor, who ultimately IPO'd. They're called Skills. So after that, again, I got lucky. I fell into Cubic's TMS, and they were trying to democratize transportation management systems. And I joined and was mentored by some of the smartest people that I've ever been around. And we were able to grow the company 11x over 3 years. And then it was acquired by Trimble. So stayed there for a year, knew I wanted to get back to building. And then after that, I went and joined Tive and had a similar approximately 10x run up as their founding sales leader and worked with our mutual friend, Jim Waters. And then basically went to another company, Freight, for final mile delivery solutions. And to me, it was really, since I didn't start in transportation, part of taking that job was I knew the value props that mattered to 3PLs, but I didn't know all of the personal pain and what was I taught that was rhetoric and a sales tactic by somebody else when I was in tech versus what's real. So I just learned a tremendous amount about the operations of 3PLs within that. And now I'm here.
Very nice. Very nice. Before we hit record, we were talking about how to grow FreightTech sales. And you already alluded to it in the beginning of the podcast, but I know you're working with customers and you've been a sales guy for a long time, but you're working now with customers, mostly in FreightTech, but do you also work with logistics companies?
Yeah, one. Yep.
Okay. I think these challenges, what we're going to talk about applies to all, not only tech companies, but also logistics companies, which all feel like tech companies these days. But anyway, you talked about 3 ways that we can grow our sales. So the first one, you already said it earlier on, was larger sales. Please elaborate on that one.
So larger sales. So like the best person I ever mentored with under was an engineer. And so I mean, basically what I learned is you take a math, sales comes down to math at some level. So I sell a product for $100. I get 100 opportunities to sell it, and I convert 25% of them. My sales is $2,500. So those are the three variables you have within any sort of sales organization. So by selling larger deals, if that $100 sale becomes a $200 sale on average, I've doubled the revenue within the company. So within that, that is one of the three ways that I'm focused on.
One of the levers.
One of the levers you can pull, because there's variables, right? Like maybe I don't have more money to spend, or maybe I need to reduce people but hit the same number. So like within those three buckets, there becomes different tactics you can employ to try and drive something up.
So so when you say larger deals, so there's some people listening saying, hey, we sell it for this. And we have competition. How do I just make larger deals? And if you're a freight broker right now listening and it says, hey, the deals are what the market says it can be.
Yep. So on larger deals, there's a couple of tactics that I employ to help, because it's not a silver bullet. Like how you do it is not a silver bullet, but some of the ways to get to it is first understanding your ideal customer profile, understanding the personas that are involved in your deals, whether you actually interface with them or not. So for example, if I'm a freight broker and I sell to locations of the tile shop, for example, as a random company, by going to corporate, by getting proof points on the ground and going to corporate and working out programs where you can add additional value, you have internal case studies, and you can connect the dots and not say, I sell on service, which is what every other person is saying, whether they do or not. By finding different people within the organization and understanding what they care about and how your product is complementary to that is one of the ways that we would employ to sell larger deals.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also think you mentioned how we all sell. You want to be able to say we're the only ones who are doing a certain thing. And I'm a big believer that if I was at the tile shop and somebody said, oh, I really want to work with you, if they weren't already happy with the 3PL or broker they were using, my first thought would be, I want to work with somebody who is in this business. This is all, they move tile for my competition. They understand the unique challenges of my business. I think everybody, to some extent, is looking for experts. And I think it's a lot easier to sell with a little bit of margin, if that, and I think to get to that bigger sale, I got to take myself out of the transactional, move into the strategic, which isn't certainly not easy. But I've said it many times on the podcast. If I was selling freight services right now, I would like to be able to say to someone, I'm going to save you 5% next year on this, or we're going to improve your service next year. I want all of it. I don't want to save you $50 on tomorrow's load. That I feel is the lowest common denominator. Not that we haven't all done it, but that's not how we want to engage.
Yeah. It's generally speaking in the market, I totally agree with you. The typical sales motion has moved more from, if I sell TMS, selling you every single thing that I have in one deal, which I often overcommit for my company and make it too big and complicated for you, to selling a piece and being able to land and expand within that business as we earn trust, because there's no shortage of options. There's no shortage of people saying they do everything. And the proof ultimately is in the pudding, and that trust needs to be earned.
Yep. And we all have the ability to touch so many customers now. And that is a little bit of the problem. When you look at your inbox, look how many people can reach out and talk to you. And you go, and they used to be, okay, they can reach me via LinkedIn, but people already know Ratchet Ventures and I know what Ryan's email is, I'm going to send him this because he could buy from us. And there's more ways to touch customers than ever before, but that also means it's hard to get their attention. And by the way, people come on podcasts like mine and create videos and go on YouTube and all that because it's harder to get attention now than ever before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you and I, in our pre-show prep, even talked about this concept is with the state of ChatGPT, it's not enough to send an email or post on LinkedIn just some random thing that it created, because everyone can do that. So as we look at AI, I predict the value of logistics and Joe Lynch skyrockets because all of a sudden everybody becomes an expert because they're able to document things within AI and put it on a slide or put it on LinkedIn. You know that Joe Lynch is an expert because you hear him talk on a show and demonstrate that constantly. So I believe we'll see a big rise in that as a way to differentiate. I also think that a lot of my sales methodology for top of funnel has less to do with the smile and dial world. I still think the phone is better than email. It's differentiated again because all your competitors just want to send automated emails. So the phone is back to actually differentiated. However, I think the networking element of business is in some scenarios underserved. If Joe,
Yeah.
you were to call me and say, you got to meet with this person, whether or not they'd sent me 100 cold emails that are automated, I'm going to take that meeting versus just delete those emails.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've worked with people, and now I call them. I go, "Sorry, I'm going old school. I just called you. I'm not on your calendar. We're not having a Zoom call. We're not having a Teams meeting or a Google meeting." And it's, oh yeah. And I always feel like relationships can perform in maybe over Zoom or Teams or on a phone, but not so much by emails. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is higher conversion. So we talked about larger deal size. We got to somehow make that a bigger deal, bigger sale size. But higher conversions, that's mean I'm going to close more of the deals that I come across. So please elaborate on that one.
The first step in this ultimately is understanding your current state. There's CRM systems that can give you some of this information out of the box now, which hasn't always been the case. But from a conversion standpoint, what I always look at is first, do we know where deals fall off? Are we priced too highly? Does our demo stink? Do we not ask the right questions up front? And try and analyze where specifically in deals customers fall off their journey. The other element I would look at is, why do people buy? So a reason that you got to close one deal, and why don't people buy? And I think the general perception of people at early stage companies is that it always comes down to price. However, in my experience, it usually comes down to we didn't understand what the ultimate goal and what was important to the customer is on the front end. That's always getting a baseline and starting that process within the sales process. If you were not aware that a CFO is involved in today's market in every single deal, whether or not we are in that deal, or excuse me, that they ever show their face in that deal, I'm here to tell you they are. And whether or not we can reach them is different than if we have the person we're working with prepared, that we're spread across the organization with all of the leaders that could say no to us, that we're getting to a point of, let's have a plan to win that's based on meeting the customer's needs more so than focused on being the least expensive option.
And I think I mentioned it earlier when we talked about larger deal size, this idea of a niche. And I know you're a big believer in that too. If I have a niche and I say, look, I'm working with companies that ship building materials like tiles, and that's all we do. And we really have dug into that. We go to their conferences, we do research online, we join groups, we keep asking our current customers, what are the biggest challenges? And now I can use that information in in my calls. And so if you say, yeah, the only people on who I met this week ship building materials, and they go, oh, yeah, Joe and Ryan specialize in this. That's all they do. Our conversions go up because we know your business really well because we work with companies just like you. And I think I've said this, many people call me on the phone, usually younger guys, gals call and say, I just want to sell more. I work, and usually it's one of these large brokers. And I said, if you have to make 50 calls a day, make them to the same kind of company. You say, if your company specializes, you have a specialization in retail, only call retail people. And I said, and then your day job is the 100 phone calls a day. Your night job is joining retail logistics groups, finding what magazines they read, become a retail logistics expert. And I said, though, so if I got to have 100 calls, why not have 100 calls with people who I really understand their business? My conversions just skyrocket right away.
Absolutely. And absolutely believe, even with my business, like I'm focused on a niche because that's where my brand is, that's where my experience is, that's where my success stories are. So like leaning on that helps with my conversion of deals. But you just spurred a quick little anecdote from one of the customers I'm working with right now. So going back to exactly what you're talking about and larger deals. So I have a customer and they were like, oh, we have this deal. It's $1.8 million. And I'm like, why would this company buy it from you and not someone else? And they were like, they would buy it from us because it's highly customized and no one else would want to do it. And my response was, is $1.8 million enough money? And they were like, what? That's 100 times our average deal size. And the reality is there's a reason everybody else doesn't want to do it. So have we actually thought through what the cost and disruption is on our business and the opportunity cost of taking this project versus building something more scalable? So it's interesting that if sales does a good job in hitting an ideal customer profile, whether transportation or tech, the product, call yourself a product manager, because the product gets better for customers in that vertical. If I sell cross-country transportation, the more volume that I have for cross-country transportation improves my ability to have that product going forward.
Yep. I know everybody says the same thing, but I think a lot of times when I talk, especially to young people, they don't have a specialization. And if you just randomly make phone calls or send random emails across anybody who's a shipper, when somebody says to me, we just work with shippers, I'm like, that's just, it's wrongheaded in my mind. And by the way, if you look at the biggest companies I'll use freight brokerage for a moment, they have 12, 13 customer segments. This is who we work with. There's companies I've talked to, they say, we only move poultry and produce. That's it. Poultry, produce. That's what we do. We do reefer stuff only for these companies. And we're busy. And we might as well do that as opposed to the scatter shot. I'll use one more example. I went to a business networking thing years ago. And I bumped into this guy and he said, I asked him what he did. And he says, oh, I own a company called Assisted Moving. And I said, oh, what is that? And he goes, we move people who are going into assisted living, usually coming from a bigger house, going into a smaller apartment. And I was like, oh, that's good. I go, how'd you get into that? He goes, I worked at assisted living facilities, a number of them. He says, I've been social director. I've been in charge of this, that, the other. He had all sorts of jobs there. And he said, then I started this company. He goes, I go back to all my old employers who I have good relationships with and said, I gave him my card, I gave him my brochure, and he said, it's working. And so I said, do you move anybody else? He goes, when we first started, we made other moves. People would call us and say, can you help me move from one house to another? He goes, not anymore. And he said, we will take some of their stuff to Goodwill. Some of the stuff will drop off at their kid's house. Some stuff will drop off at an estate sale. He said, we do everything that an older person or older couple needs to move into assisted living. And I was like, the dude's got no competition for that. I'm sure he does. But it's just what a compelling sale that is, as opposed to saying, I guess we can move you to assisted living. We know how to move stuff.
And every deal they would do that was not that would give their team, would dilute their team's focus on that. So I won't pretend to be an expert in that, but if dealing with a receptionist or like what type of equipment I need on my vehicle or whether I plan on going up or down stairs with heavy items, everything I do that's not that gives me a chance of being worse at my core business, because I could screw up my product.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So we want to get those higher conversions. And by the way, I know you mentioned our friend Jim Waters. He has a fractional CMO business, Chief Marketing Officer. And I know his whole purpose in marketing is to get some opportunities, some leads, right? And there's that forever tension between marketing and sales. But I feel like those are merging into one job, because when somebody like a sales guy is sending outreach emails, you go, it switched into a little bit of marketing, especially as we use more and more tools that are marketing tools. But one of the things that's come up many times when I talk about sales is people go, oh yeah, we get leads from marketing that don't take us anywhere. But I think increasingly we're getting pretty good at focus. I only want to work with people who move this certain product, and those are the ones we sell. Or I need this size company. We have the information. So there's really no excuse for having really low conversions. And low conversions would imply that I'm doing a whole bunch of deals with unqualified targets.
Yep. Or product efficiency but yeah. So one, shout out to Jim Waters. He has been my counterpart in my last 2 full-time roles. He is the best because, to your point, there is a historical battle between sales and marketing, and that alignment, why I would be sick enough to want to go do another one with him, is because he's a really easy person to get aligned to. And so that drives the third way to increase sales is more at bats or more attempts to close a deal, more opportunities. Thank you. So within this, like what in my system and methodology, we talked a bit about it, but ideal customer profile. So who is it? What industries do we care the most about and why? That's supported by our product differentiation, our customers and experience, and the story we can tell. And then within that, I want to arm marketing and the sales team to have the personas and what their personal and organizational problems are that our product can solve. So that gives both sales and marketing the ammo to focus on the right companies and the right people within them and be able to start doing messaging at scale. The other area that I typically do through this assessment is we build a target account list that is based on firmographic data or regional data or product data. And we assign those out not only to marketing, but to the sales organization. And we start to measure not only like how many activities. I'm less of a boiler room type person, but I want to know that people are having meaningful conversations with our ideal customer profile to try and help drive more interest faster. And I am often surprised salespeople are less excited about this because like they know one person across the country that may or may not be in their target accounts. But the whole concept of it is find people with a higher propensity to buy based on your story and talk to them more and really to form relationships based on value. So like relationships is a word I think we throw around a lot in our space. And I've sat in many forecasts where people are like, they like me. They like us. I like my realtor, because they make it easy for me to buy a house. There's plenty of people I like because, or I have a relationship with because I like and I want to be their friend. But in a professional setting, to me, it's more oriented toward value transfer. This person makes my life easier. This person helps me see ROI. So I think that's an important distinction to make, that if we are just saying they like me, they like us, and we don't know what that means, as a sales leader, that's a cause for concern for me, and one of the largest misconceptions I see among salespeople across the country.
Yep. And I've said this before on the podcast, but I'll say it again because I've noticed it, is salespeople who don't have enough at-bats, enough opportunities to deal with, they tend to cling to deals that are never going to close. And they have, I call it the sales friend zone. And that person, I always call Ryan because Ryan is willing to take my call and he's always kind to me. And I think we have a relationship. And then push come to shove, is Ryan ever going to buy from you? No. Then stop talking to him. Right. And we run into that. And I joke about it. It's another way to look at it is, this is going to, I'll use a dating analogy. If you look like me, right? Not exactly George Clooney. You could go, oh, I just don't have good dating opportunities. So would you be more likely to stick with someone who wasn't right? Yeah, maybe. And I think, unless you're a glowing personality like me, but I will say that sometimes, using the dating analogy, if you say, look, I know I can get another date, you're not willing to put up with crap from somebody. See, getting back to that friend zone thing. And again, some people, sales guys, I've noticed it. They're in the friend zone. There's a whole bunch of deals that'll be in their pipeline for a long time. And you go, will they ever buy from you? No, they're happy with their current provider. Well, get them out. When you have lots of opportunities, you're a better salesperson because you can get into a confidence cycle where you go, hey, if Ryan doesn't buy it, that's okay. I got another call in a half an hour. And if that guy doesn't buy it, I'm okay. I got a call in a half an hour after that. If you got a lot of opportunities, you don't fret the ones that don't work. If it's not a good fit, you're on to the next one.
Pipeline solves all problems if we think about the three ways to drive sales. So, one, if I have a bunch of unqualified deals, my conversion is going to be lower. Second, even if I close them and they're not aligned to my ideal customer profile, then if I am able to sell larger deals, they're not going to be profitable, and it's not building products or lanes that are valuable for me to continue growing my business. So having enough pipeline allows you a great feeling to be able to say, no, I don't want to do that, Mr. Customer. That's not a good deal for our company for whatever reason. And it enables you to focus your time on the deals that can really move the needle versus chasing around a bunch of suspects.
You gotta have discipline. I was involved with the deal and we ultimately didn't win it, thank God, but it was a massive deal. But to win it, we would have to be really low margin. This was a freight deal. We'd have to be really low margin. And I was like, oh, and the good news was the top line was like, oh my God, we're going to grow like a weed thanks to this. The bad news was this ridiculous low margin. And I remember just thinking to myself, does it even really pay for itself? Are we going to lose money on this? But at that time, there wasn't tons of opportunities. So it's really tempting to take the bad deals. And we're in a difficult market for a lot of people. You just don't want to find yourself in a place where you're saying yes when you should be saying no, because you'd say, when am I going to have another opportunity?
Yep. I've been lucky like that too. You have to get there. There is luck involved in sales, but it's typically, in my experience, it's correlated directly to what you're doing for yourself. But I've had bad deals that fortunately I did not win also before I learned some of these lessons that could have not put the company in a great spot.
Yeah, Ryan, your luck is probably because you're Irish, so don't apply it to that. Anyway, so I want to talk about how you work with customers. So the idea is relatively new. We're starting, I worked at a company that had a fractional CFO. It was a startup, venture capital backed, and there was a fractional CFO. He worked with 4 different, maybe more, of this venture capital's customers. So that guy we had a CFO when we needed him, but we didn't need him that much. You're a fractional CRO. And so how does it work when companies are working with you? First off, why do companies call you? And then how do you engage with them?
So companies typically call me. It could be for stagnation and growth, or it could be that they're hitting a barrier or starting to see a decline, or they just turned over their second sales team. There's some compelling event typically tied to a lack of increase in the sales organization, a transitioning of responsibilities, or an increase in expectations and funding tend to be like the triggers as to why I get called. And then the way that I interact with customers, like having been a 3-time head of sales in companies that grew at least 5x in under a couple of years, my process and methodology typically is like through the sales process, there's some level of discovery. I get the company's thoughts on where they need help. I do an assessment, like then we start working together. I start with an assessment, and I find that a lot of people in the space that I'm in want to just bill a gazillion hours of discovery. I find that it's helpful to have a deliverable for people because not everybody wants your findings. It's challenging to tell the owner and creator of something, areas of opportunity, that there's a lot of pride and sweat and tears that go into these things. So I typically do a month-long discovery, and at the end of it, I leverage a methodology that I've used to do an output for what my analysis through conversations of your ideal customer profile is. I meet the players, I understand the systems and the people. And then it's really not a one size fits all. My life would be a lot easier if it had been, but just like every company that I've worked at, there's varying levels of challenges. Some have greater sales infrastructure set up when I get there. Some have none. Some don't know what their message should be to different people. Some are looking to open up an indirect channel. So after the assessment, we agree on priorities and go forward plan. And the pieces that I'm almost always doing is leading sales operations footprint. So how do we get the data that we need and measurables that we can inspect to make sure we're driving the result that we want? I've been told my superpower is pipeline and forecast management. So I have a process that I usually implement for that. For strategic deals, I'm usually sitting and supporting the salesperson on strategic deals. And then there's a variety of strategic. So those pieces are on an ongoing basis. And then we have a prioritized list of strategic projects that I'm either working on directly or supporting their team in executing.
So you're an outside company. So you're coming in. Are you carrying their business cards and engaging with prospecting customers?
So I recently, sorry, you said, am I prospecting for them?
So Ryan, when you're working with your customers, would you ever have an occasion to engage with their customers, so your customer's customer? And how does that work? Because you obviously have to engage somewhat with them so you understand what's working and what's not. How do you say I'm an outside consultant working with them, or how's that work?
Yeah. So most of the time I would say I interface with some percentage of my customers. It's typically in strategic deals, but because it's a fractional head of sales role, my expectations are basically what the expectations would be of the head of sales in supporting deals. While most of the engagements I work on are more on the strategic and process side, because pipeline and forecast has been my gift, a lot of my methodology involves isolating the top 10% of deals, building winning strategies, and I'm a blackjack player. So we want to double down on the ones that are the largest within our ideal customer profile and the most likely. So in some scenarios, I have an email address for my customer. And when I'm introduced in some variation of this is our fractional sales leader, and yeah, there hasn't been much pushback.
I don't think people care anymore, especially when you talk about transportation and logistics, because if you're a freight broker, you have your carrier partners, you have your tech partners, you might have an outsourcing partner. We're also used to it. I think it's the nature of the world now. I don't think people particularly care. But I think also when I think about a CRO, your mission is I want to get them up to speed. I want to turbocharge what they're doing. And when I leave, whenever that is, I want them to have better experience, better skills, better knowledge about how to grow their sales without you.
Yeah, exactly. It's really foundational set of tools and processes that the goal is to teach people to fish. And there's even scenarios where it's predefined that they're going to hire a full-time head of sales. And it's known that I am part of this transition team and even involved in the recruitment and interviewing of the person that'll join full-time. Through this transition to Ratchet Ventures and consulting, I've had to think a lot about what's important to me. And there's a lot of accolades that I used to think were important, but it really comes down to the people that you're able to influence and help to have a better life long term.
Yep. We talked about this the other day, last week actually, and I think it's very important is we now look at companies in as a process. There's a growth process. So if you talk to venture capitalists, they'll say, here's the roadmap for this company. You mentioned the seed round and then there's Series A, then Series B. But even if you're a smaller, not backed by venture capital or private equity, you still have certain stages of growth and we know what those look like. One of the challenges you run into is if you're a smaller company and you say, we need a CRO to come in and set up our sales and help us understand how we're going to engage with the market. But some CRO level people would not necessarily be the guys who want to pick up the phone or send emails and actually sell. So sometimes you might feel like I need the CRO's touch early in the first stage of the business, but that CRO might say, hey, that's below my pay grade. I'm not going to spend a lot of time making phone calls and selling. You hired me as the CRO. Conversely, we also run into a problem sometimes where a company, you have a sales leader, junior maybe, who's grown with the company and might not quite be ready for that CRO job, but he's been there and you want them to have that. So they need some help, some mentoring, some direction. So some of the challenges we run into is no one wants to let that junior sales leader who's been with you for 5 years as you ramped up say, hey, time for you to go because I want somebody senior in that role. You want to be able to develop them. And again, this is the challenge with growing companies is you're constantly swapping out people and it's a painful process.
Yeah, it's painful. And I think that it causes, from a mental standpoint, for all the employees that are not involved, that stop start of change management and direction was something that while you're trying to do the right thing and level up a position of need, like you outlined, there could be inverse implications for that. So I think just in general, we need to look at onboarding of people and ongoing enablement of people as something that both parties, the company and the employee, both have responsibilities within, because everyone wants to go somewhere where they can teach something and they can learn something.
Yep. And I also believe that there's a lot of people outsourcing stuff, and we're going to continue to do that. It makes a lot of sense. So if you're outsourcing to the Philippines or to Mexico or to Colombia, lots of companies makes a lot of sense. We're usually doing it because you save some money. And usually that talent is great talent and it's going to continue to get better. But if you say, I still need a CRO's touch. I need someone who can give me a direction, a strategic direction. And I'm not going to be able to get that from this outsourced resource, but I might want to pair some of these together and say, if I can get a CRO on a fractional basis, 10, 20, 30 hours, or maybe 3 months in a row, and then also use some of these lesser cost resources, people, that's a good fit for some companies.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's whether it's outsourcing or nearshoring or it is AI to offset costs. I think the important thing is people need to have a plan. Too often it's looked at as a silver bullet for cost cutting and everything is the same. And if there's not a plan to manage that process, like maybe it is a fractional CRO or a head of ops or whatever it is, there just needs to be a plan because these things are often talked about like they're magic bullets. And the reality is everyone would do it for every role if it were that easy.
Yep. There's reasons companies like yours popped up. There is a real need. I know you're really busy. I just talked to you last week. You were at what conference were you at last week when I called you?
I was at Samsara Beyond, their user conference. Very fascinating side of the world with, and I have no affiliation, but the development in ELDs, how it's gone from like dusty boxes to like little AI wizards that could tell your charging efficiency of electronic vehicles, and AI that if you get drowsy and they see you like do a couple different symptoms, close your eyes or yawn, it automatically through the video sees you and sends you like a training. It just is crazy how far it's come.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this bad boy up. I'm going to summarize, and I want to get your final thoughts. So I'm talking to my friend, Ryan Sullivan, and we're talking about the CRO Perspective, growing FreightTech sales. So Ryan, we talked about there's 3 ways you can go about growing your sales. I don't think any of this is a mystery. First off, you can get larger deal sizes. We should all do that for sure. We can also have a higher conversion rate. And again, I think we talked about the importance of picking your ideal customer, and that's who you should focus on. That's who you should be talking to. You're going to have higher conversions as a result. And then we talked about more at bats. And I'm a big believer the last 2, more at bats. If you can say, I am having lots of opportunities as a salesperson, you can feel good about that because you're like, yeah, I might have lost 3 deals today, but I got 3 more this afternoon. Life is good. You can always, if you have those opportunities, what you also do is you become a much better salesperson because you have so much more experience. And then we talked about how you and your team at Ratchet Ventures, how you guys engage with freight tech companies and logistics companies, that's being your area of specialization. Final thoughts on this one, Ryan Sullivan?
First of all, thanks for having me on.
My pleasure.
The final thoughts I have are really just within supply chain technology and the way not only the freight market has been operating, but the venture community and private equity. There are the barriers for growth and securing capital or new customers continues to increase. 5 years ago, if you were a software company and you could get to $1 million in annual recurring revenue, you were getting a Series A and your company was worth $10 million. Those things aren't given today. There are more metrics that investors care about. There are dramatically different competitive landscapes, and the big opportunity cost we have in these stages of companies is time. I founded this company because I almost took a role that I wasn't that excited about because they had someone like what I'm doing now in it for 6 months. And as a head of sales joining a company, your clock starts ticking immediately and there's months of cleanup to do. So if companies are in a position like that I could be helpful for, I would love to. The other side of things is I've gotten a ton of messages from salespeople that are considering going out on their own and trying to go down this entrepreneurial path. That may be a call for another day, Joe, the pros and cons to doing stuff like this. But anybody that got value out of this or has questions about how to do it on your own, I'm happy to be a resource.
Yep. And what I'll do is I'll put a link to your website, a link to your LinkedIn profile, and any other links you and your marketing team give me, I will put those in the show notes. Ryan, it is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, Joe. Thank you for the time.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.